Alrighty, so we're back with another tutorial. For this tutorial, we are going to look at creating a function that takes parameters inside of Scratch. And what we're going to make is we're going to make a very simple dice rolling game or dice rolling program. So let's get started with that. So first thing I'm going to do is sign into Scratch here and come over and create a new file. And of course, I'm going to rename my file straight away so I don't lose it. We will call this dice program. And we are going to start. So I'll first put just a comment in here. And so what we want this program to do, this program will allow the user to choose the number of dice and how many sides each die will have. And then the user will be able to roll the dice. Now, for this particular program, we're not going to really do a whole lot of graphics, so it's not really going to look like the dice are being rolled, but we can make it. We're essentially going to make the sprite say what the dice are and how many dice there are, and so forth. So let's jump in, see how we do this. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I need to get a sprite that looks like a die. And just remember, die is singular for dice, of course. And you'll notice inside all of the sprites in Scratch, there are not any dice. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to head over to Google and I'm going to type in dice. I'm going to look for images. Let's find a die. Let's just go, or you know what I actually want? I want something that has no background. So I'll go to tools, I'll do color, I'll do transparent. And this one looks pretty good. Now again, just be careful if you are using any images. Obviously you do need to credit the source for your image. To be on the safe side, let's go ahead and go to usage rights up here. Let's look for Creative Commons. So anything under Creative Commons should be an image that you are able to use because that image has not been copyrighted. So we should be able to use these images without getting into any trouble, hopefully. Let's use this one. Okay, that one looks okay. So I'm going to two-finger tap or right-click on this image, save image, and I'm going to drop it on my desktop. If you're doing this on a Chromebook, you can just save it. You can either save it to your Google Drive or just save it to your Chromebook. And then if I head back over to Scratch, what I'm going to do is hover over the Choose Sprite button, and I'm going to go to this very top button that says Upload Sprite. I'll click Upload, and you'll see that it opens up a window on my computer. This might look different from yours since I'm on a Mac, but it should be something like this. Then you want to just remember where you saved that image, click on it, and click Open. So now you'll see that we have our die right there in the middle of the screen. So I'm actually going to go ahead and actually, since this comment is on my cat sprite, I'm also going to just put it on the die sprite. Then I can actually get rid of the cat for this one since we're just going to use the die. So first thing, let's resize this a little bit. Let's shrink it down. So maybe let's put it at 75%. And I'll probably go for 50 actually. Okay, there's 50. And let's see, let's put it sort of centered in the screen. And if you remember how we center things, in Scratch, this viewing window here is actually a quadrant graph with 0.00 in the middle. And I think it goes up to, what does it go up to? 250, I think. Something like that. So 0, 0 is the very middle of the screen. So on the x-axis, I just want to put that at 0. And then on the y-axis, I want to give the sprite a little bit of room for the speech bubble to come off of it. So what I'm going to do is I'll probably put it at -20. Maybe a little more than that. Let's go -50, -50. There we go. Let's leave it right about there. So far we have our sprite. What we want this sprite to do is we want to make it so that when we click on the sprite, it's going to ask how many dice you want to roll, and also it's going to ask how many sides you want each die to have. So you can have anywhere from sort of 3 sides up to, I think a lot of dies go up to, I mean, they can get pretty big if we look in here. So you'll see some dies here like that go up pretty high. It looks like that one probably goes up to 100. So we do want to give the user the ability to choose how many sides they want, and then also how many dies they want to roll. And so here's how we're going to do this. So very first thing, I'm going to come over to events, and I want to get a when sprite is clicked block. What that's going to do, it's going to run my code when I click on the die. Now for this program, right, and actually before I even do this, for this program, I want to create a function, and this function is basically going to allow me to roll dice. And so in order to make a function in Scratch, I'm going to come over to my blocks, click on my make a block, and I'm going to call this block roll dice. And so this is going to be the name of our function. And we'll go into a little more detail what a function is in a second, but the name of this function is going to be called roll dice, and it's going to take in 2 parameters. The first parameter is going to be number of dice, and I'll just call this num of dice, like so. And then the other one is going to be num of sides per die. And I will hit OK. So now you're going to notice we get this block here, and it says define. Now, what a function does, and the reason why it's so helpful when we're writing a program or writing code, is a function does some sort of work, but what it also does is it adds a layer of abstraction. And here's what I mean by that. So rather than, if I wanted to run this program, right, and I wanted to roll some dice, I could drop this whole list of code right underneath the when sprite is clicked block. That's gonna run my code. However, if I define what the roll dice function does underneath this block here, all I then need to do is grab my roll dice block, and as soon as I run this block, it's gonna run everything that is underneath this define block. Now you might be wondering, well, what does it matter? Why can't I just write my code underneath this when sprite is clicked block? Well, the advantage is if you have multiple scripts or multiple mini programs running this roll dice code, and you find that you want to make a change to it, you have to go to each of those individual blocks or individual scripts and make the changes. Whereas if all of your code is defined under one block, I can make the change here, and as soon as I make the change where the function is defined, this block will be updated. So it's just a lot cleaner way of writing your code, and it makes it a lot more efficient. So let's get started and let's define this function. So the first thing the function is going to do is it should ask, and actually what we'll do, we won't have the function ask the user. We're just going to define what the function actually does. It's going to just roll the dice. Okay, so the way that we are going to create our dice is we're actually going to use a list. So I'm going to head over to this variables category here, and I'm going to click on list. And I'm going to call this list dice and hit OK. So you'll see over here, I have a list called dice. Now, what I want to happen is I want each entry on this list to be, each entry on the list is gonna represent one die, and it's gonna have a number between 1 and whatever the user decides, or whatever the user enters. And so the way we do that, first thing I wanna do is I want to grab a block that says add something to dice. So this block, similar to in Python where we have the append block. So in Python, we might call this the .append block, and it would look something like this. X would go in there, or something would go in there. It would look something like that. So we've got this add thing to dice. And the thing that I want to add is I want this to add a number. But of course, they're dice, right? They're dice. So these are going to be random numbers. So I'm going to grab the pick random block, which picks a random number between 1 and then some other number. I'm going to drop that in there. Now, if you remember, we want the user to choose the number of sides. So the number of sides is going to be that random number between 1 and whatever the maximum number of sides is. So if this was a regular die, a regular cube die, it's going to have anywhere from it's going to have 1 side up to 6 sides, right? So 1 to 6 on a normal die. However, because I want the user to choose this, I'm going to take this input, which is up here in our function, and I'm going to put it there. Now, what I'm doing here is I am telling Scratch that this parameter or this argument right here is going to be used in the function right here. So num of sides, whatever the user puts in for this parameter, is going to be used here. And it's going to be used as a random number between 1 and whatever this number happens to be. And then it's going to add it to our list of dice. So I've got a random number, which is awesome. However, I need to know the number of dice. So I need to know the number of dice. And the way I can do that, or another way of thinking about this, is that if the user wants to say roll 3 dice, all I'm really doing is repeating this block of code 3 times. That's all number of dice is. So what I can actually do is come up to control, and I can grab a repeat loop. I'm gonna grab a repeat loop. But instead of repeating this 10 times, I want to repeat it for the number of dice that the user types in. So now I have my 2 parameters. My 2 parameters in the function are being used in these 2 positions. Number of dice is going to be how many times the program repeats and adds a number to our list. And then the number of sides is going to represent the random number between 1 and whatever that number is. So far we have our function. So let's just see what happens if I now take the block right here and put it on my when sprite is clicked block. So let's see what happens when I click this die. So you see that nothing's happening. And nothing is happening because this requires 2 parameters. So let's see what happens. Let's see if we can get this to work. So I'm gonna choose, I'm gonna say let's do 3 dice, because the first parameter is number of dice. So I'm gonna say let's roll 3 dice, and let's have this dice be a normal cube die that has 6 sides. So I've got 3 dice, 6 sides. Let's see what happens when I click this sprite. So you'll see I now have 3 numbers on my list. 3 numbers on my list. And you'll see that they're between 1 and 6. So this is basically the equivalent of taking 3 dies and just rolling them. You got 3 different numbers there. So next thing we want to do, well, we do want to give the user the ability to choose how many dice they want and also how many sides they want each die to have. So for me to do that, all I have to do is come over and grab an ask block. And so I'm going to say, how many dice would you like to roll? How many dice would you like to roll? And I'm also going to ask the question, how many sides would you like each die to have? Now notice here I have 2 questions, which means I'm going to have 2 answers. Because I have 2 answers, I will need to create a variable to be able to better store these answers. So my first variable we will call num of dice. Num of dice. And the second variable we'll call num of sides. Now, just like in Python, you'll notice that I already have these variables over here where I define my function. However, you'll notice that these variables are different. They're different colors. So notice one's pink, one's orange. These are not the same thing. And the reason they're not the same thing is because when you define a function, the variables that you have within the function are limited to just this function. So this is called something we call scope. So these variables are not available outside of this function. They're just used to tell Scratch what the program is doing or what the function is doing. So I can actually reuse these variables outside of the function. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab a set block. And I want to set so the first one says, how many dice would you like to roll? I'll set the first one to num of dice, and I'm going to save the answer from this question to num of dice. Then I want to ask the question, how many sides would you like each die to have? And then I'm going to grab another set block, and I'm going to this time set the number of sides to the answer to this question. Now remember, this, when you see these little answer blocks, it doesn't matter if I swap these around because Scratch knows that I've got a question here, so the very next answer is going to be the answer to this question. Okay, then I roll my dice, but I want to use my inputs. So the input, the first one is going to be num of dice, because if you remember over on my function, the first input is the number of dice, the second is the number of sides. So I'm going to do it like that. And notice how my die is kind of being covered up by the question block. So I'm just going to raise this up a little bit. Actually, let's see. Maybe I'll put it right about there. That looks pretty good. Okay. So let's hit the green flag. Let's click our die. It says, how many dice would you like to roll? We'll do 3 again. And how many sides? Let's do 6 again. And you'll notice now I've got another 3 rolls. Now the problem with this is we could get confused as to what roll belongs to, like which numbers belong to which roll. So maybe what our function will do, is it'll reset itself after each run. Or maybe what I can do is, maybe we'll do something like this. And actually, you know what? Let's create another function. And this one, we will not take any parameters for it. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna say clear list. We'll call this function clear list. And this function, as you can see, does not take in any parameters. Does not take in any parameters. So for this function, what we're gonna do is let's grab an ask block. And we're gonna say, would you like to roll again? Would you like to roll again? Type 1 to roll or 0 to quit. So we're asking the question, would you like to roll again? Type 1 to roll or 0 to quit. And now what we're gonna do here, so would you like to roll again? Type 1 to roll or 0 to quit. So I'm going to come over to my control and I'm going to grab an if then else statement. And I'm going to grab an operator and I'm going to grab one of these equal comparison operators. Then I'm going to go back to sensing and I'm going to grab an answer again, because this is going to represent the answer to this question. I'm going to say if the answer equals 1, and we'll come back and fill in this part. But if the answer equals 1, the program's going to allow the user to roll again. If the answer is 0, and so what I actually want to do is I want to grab another if then else, because I've got if the answer equals 1, do this, else if the answer equals 0. So if the answer equals 0, the program is going to quit. So I can come up to control again, and I'm going to grab a stop all block. I'm going to end the program. Otherwise, we're going to say, please enter a 1 or 0 only. Please enter a 1 or 0 only. Okay, so far, let's see what we got here. We have our function that rolls the dice, which is great. We also have a when Sprite is clicked, so we have a little script over here that says, how many dice would you like to roll? It asks for a number of dice, then it asks how many sides would you like? It saves those two answers to variables. We use those variables as the input to our function and the dice roll. However, if you remember, if we keep doing this, the list just stays the same. Let's say now I type 2, I want 2 dice to roll. I want them to have 10 sides. This is going to get really confusing because we're going to have a huge list of numbers and we're not going to know what they mean. And so what we want to happen is whenever we run this function called clear list, it's going to say, would you like to roll again? Enter type a 1 to roll or 0 to quit. Either way, if we type 1 or a 0, we want our list to be cleared out. So I'm going to go over to the variables category, scroll down, and you'll see this block here called delete all of dice. I'm going to use 2 of those because first thing, if I type a 1, I want it to clear so I can roll again. And then right here, I've got another one. So if you type 0, I still want it to clear. And then I don't want to put it down here because I don't know what the user's doing. So they should only be entering 1 or 0. And then, and actually, instead of calling this clear list, let's maybe call this reset. That might be a little better name for this function, because it's essentially resetting our program. All right, now we can take the reset block and I'm going to put it right underneath the roll dice block. Let's see what happens here. Click the green flag. I'm going to click the die. How many dice would you like to roll? So you can see that this is not cleared out yet. So I'll type 3. You'll see num of dice got reset to 3, and I'll say 6 sides, hit enter. So it must have dropped those numbers on. But now let's see if our reset block works. Let's say I type 1. Okay, so our list emptied, which is great, but it didn't ask me anything. So why didn't it ask me anything? Well, it didn't ask me because you can see over here, all those questions are on in this script right here. They're not within this function. So I guess to make this run a little better, I bet we could actually put everything here underneath this function. So let's see how we can do that. Let's try this out. So first thing we'd want to do, right? Let me grab this and put it over here. So we'll say, how many dice would you like to roll? It does the normal thing. Let me take that block away actually. And then it runs the function that's up here, which rolls the dice. Once it does that, it should ask, would you like to roll again? And it will say, if the answer is 1, delete all of dice, right? Or if it's 0, it's going to delete all of dice and stop. Otherwise, it's going to say, please enter a 1 or please enter a 1 or 0 only. And then it's going to come down here and it's just going to stop, right? So let's actually see what this does. Now, because I'm running the whole program in here, I'm actually going to change this a third time. And I'm actually going to now call this start program, because that's actually what this function is doing. This function is running the program. This function up here is rolling the dice, and that is being used inside this, this function right here. So now I can come over and grab my start program block and just put it right there. So let's see what happens. I'm going to click the green flag. I'm going to click the die. And it says, how many dice would you like to roll? Let's say 3. How many sides would you like each die to have? Let's say 6. Hit enter. Oh, cool. So it rolled the dice. It put 3 on my list. And then it says, would you like to roll again? Well, let's type 1. Okay, well, so nothing happened. Nothing actually happened. And nothing happened because when I entered 1, it deleted what was on the list, and then it went down here, and of course there's nothing down here. So what I can actually do to get this to run regularly, I'm going to come over to control, and I'm actually going to grab a forever loop. Okay, and this is very similar to a while true loop in Python. So it's an infinite loop. This is going to keep running. And so I'm going to take all of my code and drop it into that forever loop. So now, let's say I do type a 1, right? It's going to go down to the bottom. It's going to see that we have a loop, and it's going to loop back up and ask, how many dice would you like to roll? Let's test this out, see if it works. Click the die. Okay, how many dice would you like to roll? Let's say 5 this time. How many sides would you like each die to have? Let's say we'll have 8 sides. I hit enter. You'll see I've got 5 dice. Those are the numbers that were rolled. Would you like to roll again? Type 1. All right, let's type 1. Okay, so it cleared my list and it's now asking me again. 3 dice, 6 sides. Cool. Let's say I want to quit. I type 0. Okay, and the program stopped. So it deleted the list and it stopped. Maybe what we could do, we might want to put a block in that just clears out these variables. And so if we were going to do that, we'd probably want to do it right where we delete the list. So if I go over to variables and I grab a set block, actually, let me do it over here first. Do 2 blocks, set num of sides. What's the first one? First one's numma dice. So let's do numma dice and then numma sides. And I'm just gonna leave that blank, just to reset it to nothing. So I'm gonna duplicate it. And what we'll do is we'll clear out our two variables first, then we'll delete the list. Do the same thing up here. Okay, let's see how that works. Let's click the die. Let's roll 10 dice this time, and we'll have them be 5-sided dice. Okay, so you can see I've got 10 dice, all rolling numbers between 1 and 5. And it says, would you like to roll again? Well, you know what? We didn't test this else statement down here. So let's say I accidentally type in an 8. It'll say, please enter a 1 or 0 only. Ah, so that's interesting. If you notice here, I typed in a number that wasn't 1 or 0. So it did what it was supposed to. It says, please enter a 1 or 0 only. And it went back all the way to the top of my loop. And so in order for us to fix that, let's say we just want this to loop down in this area, right? So what I can actually do is I'm going to pull out this whole block of code right here. And this is the block of code that says, would you like to roll again? Type a 1 to roll or a 0 to quit. Well, if I only want the user to type in a 1 or a 0, what I can do is come up to my control, and I'm going to repeat this until either the answer is 1 or 0. And so I'm going to drop this block inside my repeat loop right here. And then I'm going to go over to operators, and I'm going to grab an OR Boolean. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this statement. So if the answer equals 1 or the answer equals 2, I'm going to drop it in my repeat. So basically this block of code is going to run until, so that means it'll stop when the answer is either 1 or 0, which we want it to do because we want it to break out of this loop and then go back up to the top of our forever loop and start again. However, if the user does not enter a 1 or 0, it's going to say, please enter a 1 and 0 only. Then it's going to hit this loop and come back up and do it again. And actually, you know what we might want to do? We might want to put even the ask inside there. Let's test this out here. All right, so let's click the die. Let's say we want to roll 3. I'll just do this again, 3 and 6. All right, let's type in 8. Please enter a 1 or 0 only. And then see, it'll ask you again, would you like to roll again? Type 1 or 0. Let's say I say 9 again. Oops. No, please enter 1 or 0. Sorry. Okay, I'll do 1 now. Cool. Then it works. Try it again. Okay, there's my 3 dies. Let's say I want to quit. I'll type 0, and the program ends. Maybe I want it to say when I do type 0, maybe I want it to say something. So I can come up to looks and grab a say block, and I'll have it say this first as it's clearing everything out. I'd say, thanks for rolling. See you next time. Let's just double check that, make sure it works. 3 and 6. Let's say I end my program by typing 0. Thanks for rolling. See you next time. And then everything clears out. So as you can see here, we have 2 functions, one called roll dice, one called start program. And then literally all we need to do is have a when Sprite is clicked block, and then we run the start program function. And we only need to run this function because I'm actually running my roll dice function inside my start program function. And this is sometimes referred to as a parent-child function, because you could consider the start program sort of the parent function, and then it's running inside of it, it's running this other function called the child function. So that can be called a parent-child function. And so what we're doing is we're just adding some abstraction to our program to make it a little easier to manage, a little easier to see. I have these two functions, right? And then here's my actual code that's running the program. So this code right here is actually running the whole program. Now in Scratch, functions aren't as helpful for us as they are in other programming languages like Python. And the reason being is in other programming languages, I might have a bunch of sprites here. Like if I had another sprite, let's say beach ball, I really should be able to just come over here to my blocks and grab my function and run that function that I created over here. But in Scratch, you can't do that. You would have to define the function in every single sprite. But in other programming languages, it is a lot easier to use functions, because functions are basically things that you're doing a lot in your program. And so rather than having to rewrite all this code every time you want to run this program or every time you want to roll dice, you don't need to do that because you've already defined it in one place. And now all you need are these blocks. So like, let's say you had a bunch of these scripts that are running the start program function. Rather than having to change each of these three blocks, all I need to do is make my change under the define block, and that will update all of these ones. Right? Rather than if you had three of these, oops, if you had three of these blocks, which I can't duplicate, but let's say you had a bunch of these, you would actually physically have to go into each script and adjust it, which could be really time consuming. So that's another reason functions are so helpful. But for this tutorial, hopefully you got an idea of how to create some functions, how to use parameters with your functions, and then also how to do a parent-child function, and really just add a lot of abstraction to your program. Otherwise, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, comments, please drop them in the comments box below. Otherwise, we will see you next time.